So what happened, to those who are unaware, is that Hamas staged an insurrection, an attack into an Israeli festival, a music festival that was going on next to the Gaza area. And many civilians were killed. Many civilians were also taken hostage. And there are conflicting accounts as far as exactly what we know that there were deaths. We know that there were a lot of them. But there have obviously been conflicting accounts in terms of some of the incidents that occurred during this massacre, which is, what it was. I don't think anybody who is of good nature is going to be celebratory of what happened to innocent people, because these people, and a lot of them were liberals. I mean, talking about liberal people who, by all accounts, you could argue would probably have been on the side of Palestinian liberation. At least a lot of them would have been. But obviously, they've gotten caught in the middle of a scenario whereby they are essentially collateral. You have to educate yourself on the basic details of the situation before actually speaking about it. If you're reacting purely to what you're seeing, you are already at a disadvantage, because what you're seeing is very, very tightly controlled by media organizations and entities that have already picked a side in the conflict. Whether the side is right or wrong, I'm not talking about the validity of the side that's been picked. But what I'm saying is that a side has most definitely been selected. So if all your information and everything that you're saying is based on what you're hearing in the media, you are at a serious disadvantage in terms of fair and balanced analyses. The facts, obviously, of this situation is that this is a land dispute, and the obfuscation of the conversation is that it is complicated. It isn't actually complicated. The complication comes from the nuance of all the things that have happened since the situation initially occurred in the mid to late 40s. There was an area in the Middle East, which is, Palestine and so forth. There were already Jews who were there, as well, who'd never left. And they were living in relative harmony with the Muslim population who were there as well. The Ottoman Empire collapsed, after World War II. And the British and the French and so forth essentially took over, and they created an agreement with Jews who were obviously, after World War II, survived extermination by the Nazis and so on and so forth. And there was a Zionist movement and the Zionist movement is separate from Orthodox Judaism, which is about the idea that there is the decree of exile, I believe it is, whereby they are waiting for the return of the Messiah and so on and so forth. And therefore, the idea being that you are exiled till that day comes. So that group is not looking for a Jewish state. But then the Zionists is a different belief system that really flourished at the end of World War II because of what happened and the near extermination at that point, feeling like the only route to safety was to create a Jewish state. And in the Holy Land, so to speak, of Jerusalem, Israel, and so on. And they did this with the assistance of the British, French, and so forth, who went and essentially took the land from the people who were there, the indigenous folks, who are now the Palestinians, took the land from them, split it, and gave that region to the Jews who were coming from Europe to settle in this area. And that's the basic, if you just want to summarize it, obviously I could go into more detail, but that is the basic issue, because from that has resulted in the bloodshed and battles and fights that have occurred for the last 70 years. Because obviously what has then happened is that more and more land has been encroached and pushed the Palestinians into a very, very small strip of land, the Gaza Strip. In this period of time, the PLO rose, Palestinian Liberation, an organization that were called terrorists as well, during their day. They then became more secular, and as a result of that, Hamas rose up, which were more extreme. They were more extremists, and were not looking for any kind of peace treaty with Israel. Like, they just want to wipe them out, so to speak. But that is a result of the years and years and years and years and decades of subjugation that the Palestinian people had suffered as a result of what initially occurred at the end of World War II. Now, obviously, as I said, there is a hell of a lot more detail that can go into this. There have been heinous acts committed by both groups, the Palestinians and the Israelis, over the years, well documented. You can read up on it, of all the different incidents that have occurred, all the killings that have occurred, the bombings, the terrorist strikes, and so on and so forth, kidnappings, tortures, executions, and so on. Is it a surprise that something like this would happen if you have a group that do not have an army, do not have the backing of the most powerful empire in the world, or probably the most powerful empire in the history of mankind, the United States, do not have the backing of the United Kingdom, the previous most powerful empire in the history of the world, who are very strongly allied with the United States, Germany, France, and so forth, and the entirety of the West. The media as well, which at the end of the day, look, as a layman who is not on either side, I am neither Muslim or Israeli, I'm neither Jewish or Islam. I don't know what the perspective is of the Palestinians because we don't see their perspective in the media. To find their perspective, we need to search it out. And before the advent of TikTok and some of these social media platforms, you couldn't find those videos unless you were going into the dark web and finding them shared in like WhatsApp groups or message groups and so forth. You didn't know what was going on in the Gaza Strip. You didn't know what was happening to the Palestinians. But you have a massive machine, obviously, which is the mainstream media that we all watch, which has categorically taken a side in this conflict. Clearly, when you have a situation like that, you are going to create a level of desperation whereby people start doing things they might not normally do. That is just human nature. Because I'm looking at it and I'm saying that this cannot be resolved because it is an unsustainable situation that exists in that region. You can't just have that wall and keep those people there and think it's just going to go away when there are 2.2 million people in that strip of the most densely populated place on earth. You're controlling their water, their resources, and electricity and everything as well. The median age is 18, which is bananas. And that means the life expectancy in the Gaza Strip is so low that the median age is 18. So essentially, most of the people there, half of them are children. There is no such place that exists on the planet. Again, on a practical level, it's unsustainable because what you're doing is regenerating militants. Every time you see what is happening now, the bombing that is happening in Gaza, you're creating people you're going to have to fight in 18 to 20 years. That's literally what you're doing. The people you're fighting now are the people you created 20 years ago. Because again, as I say, if a country or a group of people do not have an army, they do not have the press behind them, they do not have any of these things, they do not have the money that is being given, in aid and so forth and support, which Israel does have from the US and from the UK, you create a situation where they will turn to extremists to stand for them. So it's like, you've got to decide now, and at this stage where things have now gotten to where we are, a decision has to be made that what do you want to do? Because are you going to say that you're going to genocide all of these people out of existence? Which is what some people are advocating for, which is the crazy part about all this, is that people are saying that, you know what, because of the actions of these terrorists, we now have a right to just wipe out the entire region because the terrorists are using them as human shields and they are willingly allowing themselves to be used as human shields. The question you've got to ask yourself is that how much power do these guys have to make those kinds of decisions anyway? Because I was looking at reports where, there have been multiple times where Palestinians have tried to escape, have tried to protest peacefully, and they were shot, sniped from the walls by Israeli soldiers. So I'm like, at the end of the day, it's like, look, if guys are doing that and they can't get out and they're essentially in an open air prison, you do have a problem here. And I know that there were claims because I was reading this and I do not know if this is true. It's crazy if it is true. But this is what people are claiming. They were like, okay, look, Benjamin Netanyahu apparently, one report from an Israeli newspaper said that he propped up Hamas because he didn't want he was trying to compromise a two-state solution. So he was essentially fostering division in Palestine between the West Bank and Gaza by propping up Hamas, because the PLO and those other groups were becoming too secular and they were gaining support, and it was coming close to a situation where it was looking like there was going to be a two-state solution. Then another person has come out now and refuted that report from the Israeli newspaper and said that no. We're not saying that what you're saying is wrong in terms of the facts of what was done, but your perspective is wrong. He did not prop them up. He just didn't do enough to wipe them out and was more willing to allow the division to exist as opposed to stamping it out. And guys, to me, that's apples and oranges. That we're splitting hairs at that point. If you're saying that you could have wiped them out and you didn't do it, and you let them fester because you were willing to allow the division to exist, it is the same thing as propping them up. So when you see that, and then this group has now turned into what it's turned into, you have to take some culpability in what has occurred here. The Israeli intelligence is the most sophisticated intelligence on earth. If there's one thing that they're good at, compared to any other intelligence group, is information. There is nothing that happens that they do not know when it comes to their own security. So the idea that people could paraglide into a festival and wage a multi-pronged attack where they crossed borders with trucks and so forth, took hostages and left before you could respond is very difficult to believe. Like, listen, maybe that is what's happened. But then it is probably the biggest failing of an intelligence organization in the history of intelligence organizations. I don't know how that happens. Like, seriously, I just don't know. So people are saying that, did you allow this to occur, or is it a failing? It's one of the two things. Either it's a massive failing or you allowed it. If it's a massive failing, the regime should just leave just on that grounds, because clearly you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. And if you allowed it to happen, then the question would be why? And then you start thinking that, is it to sort of validate the actions that are now being taken? And these are very realistic questions that I think need to be asked by all groups. And this then leads to the Jewish people as a group, because people are trying to ascribe the actions of the Israeli government to all Jewish people across the world. And that is leading to a lot of anti-Semitic rhetoric from some sides when it comes to this. Whereas if you pay attention to what is actually going on, there are many Jews who are not in support of the Israeli government. There are many Jews who are marching alongside Palestinians in New York, in London, across the world, against the actions that are happening against Gaza and the bombings that are occurring right now. There are rabbis who have spoken out about this entire thing, writers who have spoken out, Jewish people who are putting TikToks, videos, all of these things. There is a difference between the actions of a government and the mandate of and will of a people. Because what you're saying is the equivalent to saying that everything that George W. Bush did after 9/11 was the will of the entire United States population. And therefore, everybody in the United States, including the Black population, should be judged on the actions of George W. Bush and the bombing of Iraq with faulty information, with lies. That's basically what you're saying. Similarly, with the United Kingdom, everything that Tony Blair did, that clown, that he did in that situation was the will of the entire UK population. This is not the case. So it's a similar thing here, is that, look, this is a government. But I think that and this is where it gets very challenging with this situation, and why I'm now going to talk about what is very scary about this. Over the years, the conflagration of the Israeli government and the Jewish faith, religion, and the Jewish people have become so merged that it is now difficult to separate, for people who are not in parts of this group, anything from the other. So when something like this happens, the knee-jerk reaction of people who do not like Jews, who are very anti-Jewish, is to connect the two groups together and say, this is what they do. In a similar way to Black people, where if a Black person commits a crime, people who are white supremacists and anti-Black say that that is what they do. It's the same thing. And I'm going to tell you a thing that I think is very, very important in this conversation, and it is fear. We're going to talk about fear and the use of fear to create the desires you want. You see, even when I was deciding on whether or not to make this video, I thought about it because I said, you know what, this is a very sensitive topic. It's something that I don't particularly want to have to wade into, especially on my platform. And the reason why I don't is because of the reaction that there has traditionally been when anybody who isn't Jewish or from Israel or so forth actually comments on what is going on in Palestine and Israel. The reaction has been vociferous. And the automatic reaction has been that, look, if you say anything against Israel, you are automatically anti Semitic. That is a problem. What you're creating is a climate, or what has been created is a climate where people are afraid to speak. And they're afraid to speak because of repercussions, in spite of what they may or may not truly believe about you and about the situation. Now, the thing about fear, and if you've seen A Bronx Tale, you will remember what Chaz Palminteri said about fear or being loved. I never agreed with what Chaz Palminteri's character said because he said he would rather be feared. And what ended up happening to the character of Chaz Palminteri in that movie shows what happens when fear runs out. When the people that are afraid of you are no longer afraid to do certain things, you then run into a problem because you've got nowhere else to go. In order to create an impact with fear, you need to be in control of everything to do with the people who are afraid of you, their safety, their security, their futures, their livelihoods, their self-respect, their standing in the world, their reputation. If you lose control of those things, your ability to get them to say or do what you want them to do is greatly minimized and compromised. Now, the issue that we have now is that most people over the decades were scared to comment on this, scared to take the side of the Palestinians on this in public because they were afraid of the reprisals, afraid of the repercussions of doing that. We're afraid of being called anti-Semites, afraid of being called anti-Jewish and so forth. What I'm seeing now is that there's a lot of people who are not afraid anymore to say these things publicly, to say them on social media with their face, with their names, with their reputations out there, are saying, I'm pro-Palestine, I'm pro-Palestinian state, I'm pro this, I'm against Israel, I'm against what the Jews are doing, I'm against all. People are just saying this stuff now publicly. That is a very, very dangerous place to be now, because how do you walk that back in society? Because people tend to forget the propaganda that has been done is the idea that the Jews control the whole world. There are only 15 million of these guys on the planet, 15 million, most of whom are in Israel. So when you think about the number of Jews that are actually in Israel, and then you take them out of the equation, this concept that there are so many of these guys all over the world is false. It's a very, very small group of people. Now, when you have such a small group of people, it is a dangerous tightrope. It is a dangerous tightrope when historically there have been so many attempts to wipe the group out. If the way that you've survived is by creating this level of fear in the general population of even commenting on the acts that are occurring over in Israel, if you run out of that fear, you're then boxed in. Everything is based on the support of, you've got the United States, the United Kingdom, Germany, France, all of these countries that give aid, that give finances, that give logistics, that give all these things. And they do it with the mandate of the people. Because remember, what men seek is power. All of these people do not want to lose the elections. They do not want to lose power. They've connected that power and the elections with the support of Israel. And anybody who was anti that as an elected politician typically couldn't win in the United States. Do you know how scary it will be now for the Jewish people if in the United States an anti-Israel sentiment is fostered, where people are not afraid to say that anymore? And then you have a scenario whereby a president, in order to get elected, has to be against you, or can win without being for you, which is actually a better nuance of it, that they can win an election without decrying their support and undying support of Israel, without decrying their willingness to give aid every year and so forth to the support of and security of Israel. That is a very, 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 very strong possibility the way things are going, which is where I'm coming from with the idea of this is dangerous now. Because when you've lost fear, watch A Bronx Tale. If you ruled with fear and not love and respect, because what you want is if everybody was freely able to talk about something and come to a genuine understanding of your position and knows that if they wanted to, they could criticize you and you would have to defend yourself from criticism, and they would need to understand that you foster respect and understanding, which is much harder to break than when people just feel afraid to speak. So now that all of this is happening, you then look at the trajectory of what happened with Whoopi Goldberg, what happened with Nick Cannon, what happened with Kyrie Irving, what happened with all these guys. So for the black population now, and then, the BLM Chicago goes and posts what they post, which was an absolutely crazy post. I saw it and I'm like, regardless of what you feel, why would you do that? But regardless, it is very clear why South Africa would support Palestine, because it's apartheid. They had an apartheid over there. So they look at the Palestinians and they completely align with them. So you understand why. You would understand why so many Africans and African countries will side with Palestine, specifically black countries in Africa, because they're looking at this from a perspective. What has the West ever done for us? The West never care about us when we're dying. We've got multiple wars going on in Sudan. We've got in Ethiopia. You came screwed up Libya. Libya is a hellhole. Nobody cares about that. When the Ukraine situation happened, all of a sudden, everybody was supposed to focus on that. What about us? Now we've got this group over there who are brown people, which is a very important nuance of this. These are brown people against white people, which is what it looks like visually. So for the average African, they're looking at it and saying that I'm with Palestine. And now they're willing to say it vociferously. So again, why this is a dangerous scenario is that you're now waging an armed conflict or an armed operation in Gaza for the first time in history without the universal support of the world. On the surface, because yes, regardless of what people were saying behind the scenes, in terms of what is out there for people to see, this is the first time in the history of this conflict that the overwhelming public opinion is that you're wrong. It's never occurred this way before. The overwhelming public opinion is that we don't support you, guys. And this is the result of, again, the involvement of TikTok, X. The fact that Elon Musk took over X some months ago means that you're not able to control what is posted there, as you might be with Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook, and all of these other Western-owned corporations. You can't control what's happening on X. He is the West, but you know what I'm saying? It's like his policy is that, listen, it's free speech. So his idea of antagonism is that, no, I'm going to let people say whatever they want to say, from his point of view. TikTok is Chinese. So then again, like the kind of stuff you're seeing there, you would never be able to see in any of these other places. So that is what I'm saying now, where it is a very, very, very serious scenario. I do not believe that it is sustainable. There are things that are exacerbating this now because Iran is now involved. Iran allegedly had 1 million people sign up and volunteer to join the military there to fight on the side of Palestine. If need be. The Iranian government allegedly, I do not know if this is true, I read it where they were like, we're going to start launching missiles at Israel if they continue to bomb Gaza. The Egyptian government is saying that they will not allow US and UK and Western passport holding Palestinians to escape into Egypt if the sanctions against the Gaza Strip is not lifted by the West. Even that, guys, is a thing that needs to be addressed because, guys, honestly, if you're going to try and evacuate British and UK and American Palestinians out of this region, what about the Palestinians? You know what I'm saying? Like, it just doesn't even look like for you to even be negotiating with Egypt to get people out because they happen to have your passport. But you're going to leave these other guys in that situation. Listen, I mean, and this is just me, again, being an objective viewer of this, is that I don't understand how you think that's going to fly. But when you see these things happening, it then gives you pause as to what the value of human life is, depending on where you're from, to certain people. Isn't the value of an Israeli and a Palestinian supposed to be equal? These are children. What are we talking about here? Guys, you're bringing out reports about the babies, there's a story about the babies. I don't even want to put it out there like that. And then we find out that the story wasn't even corroborated. Even the IDF weren't willing to validate the story. I-24 News, I believe, an Israeli 24 News reporter said she heard it from a soldier who heard it from. And I'm like, guys, is the whole Western media? The whole Western media is going to run with a absolutely horrific story like that. The president, Biden, is going to get on the podium and actually talk about that and not validate it. You're being disingenuous. The acts of Hamas in that festival are heinous already. You do not need to embellish this anymore. You do not need to add any extra spices to it. When they were talking about the woman being assaulted, I said, listen, I then asked, I was like, oh my God, did that actually happen? And people said in the replies, that's what they do. And I was like, wait a minute, you can't just say that's what they do as a validation for crimes like that. You need some kind of like corroborative evidence that this actually took place. I'm not saying it couldn't have happened to women in a situation like this, but just to say that your proof of that and the reason why you're going around saying this is the case is because that's what they do. Guys, I mean, because, and this is what this has turned into now. This is literally what this has turned into. And what it does when you do things like this, it actually further erodes people's confidence in any of your stories. Because remember, this conflict, there are innocent groups of people in Israel and in Palestine who are children, young people, whatever. But the group of children and innocent people in Palestine are the ones who have no water, no electricity, no food. When this is or isn't over, they will not be able, the children in Israel will have food, they have electricity, they have water, they'll have those things. The kids in Palestine don't have those things. So as human beings around the world, how are we supposed to feel about that? It's like you're telling us that we know what is happening, and as good people, we know how we're supposed to feel, but we're demanding you don't feel that way till we tell you to. We'll let you know that you are supposed to feel that way for the Ukrainians. We'll tell you that. But in this case, you're not supposed to feel that way. And I'm talking about objective people here. People who do not, with the Ukraine-Russia thing, we're not thinking about the politics, we're not thinking about anything. We're just looking at, there are young folks, innocent people who are getting affected. So we're trying to help them. This is what they're telling people to do. I have my views on that whole conflict and the way that that's been handled and reported on and so forth. Very white supremacist situation. But with this, you're telling us that you need to check your feelings attached to the politics. You see what I'm saying? That's the difference. With this situation, you're looking at young folks and we're telling you that do not feel that way towards them. Connect your feelings to the politics. Connect it to it's Hamas using them as... That is listen, when it comes to war crimes, if anybody studied war and like what war crimes actually, you're not allowed to do that. That is why people use it as a tactic, because they know it's a war crime to do that. You're not allowed to just mow civilians down because your enemy is using them as human shields. That is why they use them as human shields, because it's against the Geneva Convention. It's against the international body that governs these things. I know you can't do that. So for you to use that as a reason for you to go ahead and do this now, you can't have it both ways. And this is the final point I'm going to make on this before I close this out, is that, look, this is in the Middle East, allegedly. It used to be Africa, if you go historically, like Jerusalem and Israel, technically was part of Africa till, I don't know who delineated at what point in history. But regardless, it's part of the Middle East, and it is bordered by multiple countries and multiple areas within it. So it is part of the Arab world. There are Muslims in Palestine. What I need to understand, and I do not have an answer to this, I want somebody to explain this to me. Why isn't Saudi Arabia, Egypt, UAE, and all of these countries that have Qatar, that have mainly very, very big levels of influence on the West? Qatar owns a lot of the United Kingdom. They control the United Kingdom's energy. I did a video on that. You should watch my video about how Qatar controls the UK energy and owns land, one of the biggest landowners in the UK. When you have this level of influence, I'm confused as to why you're not using that influence to resolve this situation. Because your influence is so great with the United Kingdom and the USA because of your investments and your energy and oil and the petrodollar and everything that is going on over there, that you could force them to come to a solution for this. I need someone to explain to me why countries that say that they are not, that, you know, they are allied with this group of people by religion, by region, aren't stepping in, but instead are allowing the United Kingdom to be protesting the way they are, the New York and America to be protesting, all of these other groups, African countries are getting involved. When I'm saying Africa, I'm talking about Black Africa. I don't understand. I mean, look, I have my conspiracy theories about it to do with money and, like, you know, all of that sort of stuff. But I need an understanding, because let me tell you this, guys. Because on the surface, it looks so confusing, and this entire thing looks so confusing. There is a lot we do not understand. We are seeing what we are allowed to see. But the machinations of what is truly going on here, we may never know. And that is all I've got to say about this. I pray that this ends. I hope that there is peace in that region. Regardless of how you feel about anything, nobody deserves to live the way that the Palestinians are living in that area. No human being should grow up that way, from baby to adulthood, in that environment, regardless of where you're from. It does affect me when I see those images as a human, that people are, every day they wake up in the morning to night, and that is their life. And the rest of us in the world are just carrying on, and that is their life. And listen, I wrestled with even making this video because Africa has so many problems and nobody cares about us. How many times have you seen, you know, people in the Middle East or anybody make videos about what's happening in Congo, what's happening in Burkina Faso, what's happening in Niger, what's happening in what was happening in South Africa during apartheid, what was happening in all of these places? You know what I'm saying? So at the end of the day, it's like, part of it as an African is that you're looking and saying, oh, man, if you then wade in and you even try and get involved in this conversation and you try and start, you know, when the chips are down, is anybody coming? We've got our own problems to deal with, you know. But at the end of the day, I think these things deeply affect Africa, because the precedent that gets set with how these things are handled directly affects the way things get handled on the continent of Africa, Al-Kabulan. That is what happens. So we've got to pay close attention to this and make sure that we are part of this conversation, because these things directly connect to the way international policy deals with Africa when we have our own situations. And also, it is important to create these sort of alliances, because these things do help in the future, because the world is shifting rapidly. So for most Africans, I will tell you that do not pretend or do not be deluded into thinking that this has nothing to do with you. Don't delude yourselves, okay? And I feel that people need to pay attention to this, because this could devolve into World War III, a conventional World War III. Because we've had, I believe that we're already in World War III from 2000, from 9/11. But this could devolve into the conventional version of World War III. Because as groups really start getting involved in this, they've already asked, Hamas has directly asked Putin and Russia to come in and mediate a peace thing between them and Israel. They've asked for that because they say that they trust Putin and Russia and they want him to mediate. I do not know what his response is going to be. But that in itself tells you something about the way things are splitting. Putin is now seen as, and Russia is now seen as, the alternative for everybody who feels disenfranchised from the West. Look at what is happening with BRICS and Africa. Burkina Faso doing deals with Russia, where Putin is going to build a nuclear plant in Burkina Faso. Putin is going to build a nuclear plant in Burkina Faso to help them out with their energy because of the sanctions Burkina Faso is experiencing from the West. People are not paying attention to what is going on. Putin is fully winning. Russia is winning because they're creating a scenario now where any nation that feels hard done by by the West, come to Putin, come to Russia. We'll hook you up. That's the reality. China are not close behind. So everybody who's looking, and I'm looking at this from a very, a very wide view, that guys do not realize the gravity of what is happening. These countries are being spread thin. France, you're fighting on multiple fronts now. You're losing all your African interests. Now you've got what's happening in Israel and Palestine, which you had a hand in. You've got the riots that are going on your doorstep. That's what's going on in France. You've got energy crisis. The UK is not far behind that. The US is definitely not far behind that. Guys, serious situation. I just wanted to put this out there. And as I say, you know what? Listen, the best wishes to everybody, man. Really.